it's just to make it enjoyable. So that's the difference between just translating and localizing, right? So that's important, very important to get this concept
So localization is a wider concept than just translation. You had an example of something from Fallout that you brought up when we discussed this?
Oh yeah, well, there are so many ways that you can translate a line. We worked on Fallout. As you know, Fallout is, massive. And there were so many characters, and I particularly like one line of this character. And I kept that on my desktop because I have already found 50 different ways to translate this line into Italian. So this is just to explain that the reason we're not talking, that's why it's art, because the reason is not maths, it's not technical, there isn't just one solution. There are a lot of different solutions, and this is where passion, experience, plays are different.
And the line that you mentioned from Fallout, it was, one day I hope to meet a man with no blue song to tell?
Yes, to sing.
Yeah, that's challenging. Yeah, but
that's challenging.
Okay, so I
already found 50 ways, and probably
I
we'll
find maybe 3.
even more.
Okay. So how developer can tell a good localization team from a bad localization team?
A good localization team will ask a lot of questions, especially if you don't provide a lot of reference. If you're not able to provide reference for the game, I'm talking about artwork, screenshots, whatever, and you just have an Excel sheet with all the different captions, entries, scripts, whatever to translate. Of course, because let's say it's in English. English tends to be a very vague language. So if we translate into English and French, Spanish, whatever, there are so many things that we need to know that might not be obvious just reading the line. Like, for instance, the gender, or when there is you, we need to know if it's plural, singular. So all these things, we cannot guess. We need to check with the developer. So we compile logs, all the translators send us the queries, and then we send them to the developers. And then we get, all the answers. The developer knows the game, the inside out. They've been working for the game for such a long time. They are the best people that they can answer back and give us the right questions so that we can really translate properly the game.
And you earlier said that you think localization is a part of the development process and not the part, because some of my friends, they think that localization is something technical. So you finish the game, and before you ship it, you send the Excel sheet to an agency, and the agency delivers you a second version of this sheet, and you go.
Yeah.
And then they ask me to check the version on Facebook, and I run the game, and it's horrible. But they don't know because they don't speak Russian. So I would agree with what you said, that a good localization team will ask you a lot of questions, and the bad team will just deliver.
Yeah.
And you launch, and then you have bad comments.
And then it was best if you hadn't done the localization to start with, because that's another point. If you don't have the budget, if you don't have the time to do a localization, just don't do it. Don't try to do a cheap localization, because this is just going to make your game look worse. So it's best leave it in English if you don't have the time and the means and whatever, and then do it, localize it when you can. And going back to where to place the localization, even before, the developer before mentioned, they didn't think about localization when they developed the game, and now they're having a hard time, trying to localize the game because the game is not made for localizing. So make sure that you develop your game with that in mind, and try to find a good partner, a good localization partner to start with, somebody that can give you tips to optimize your resources, the budget. That's crucial, because we know the job, we know the best way to do it. We might, give you tips and say, look, especially if the audio is involved, because audio is, very expensive, at least 3 times what is just text translation. So maybe we will tell you, look, just localize the narrator, just do that. So we have tips. So try to build a relationship with your localizator that is, a trust relationship, and get them involved during the development of the game, not just at the end,
So
because it's too late.
What you're saying is similar a bit to sound design, because you want
yeah.
to talk to your sound designer before you actually ship the game, because then you can discuss how to play the sound, how to store the sounds, and then a good sound designer can improve your game by contributing different things. So what you're suggesting is that the developers should contact someone with localization experience, maybe a friend, maybe a translator, maybe an agency, and sit down and say, we're shipping this game 6 months from now. What can we do better? This is how things are done right now. Give us some tips. So your relationship begins before you can actually ship.
And a
the
serious
lines.
localization agency should,
Be
provide
ready.
this service for free, really, because it's
Yeah.
part of our job.
We'll agree to have lunch. And, okay, especially if it's an Italian agency.
Italian, yeah, food is nice in Italy.
Okay, so the development team, how does the relationship start between the development team and localization team? You send the demo, you talk about the budget.
Ideally.
Yeah, ideally. Yes.
Well, it depends. Very often the game, sometimes it happens that the game is not finished yet when we localize. Like we worked on the first game that Sony did for PlayStation 4, that was Knack. And Knack, we had dubbing that was done in lip syncing, but of course it wasn't ready yet. So we dubbed the American actors. So we had all the motion capture of the faces of the American actors, and we were dubbing the actors, so that eventually when they would do the synchronization of the character, it would match also the other languages. So in case the game is ready or is almost ready, or there is a demo, it's crucial that before we have a kick-off meeting to start analyzing the assets.
What is the game about? What is the setting? What is the style? What is the vision?
Style, the age, target, that's important. This, what I call the soul, of the project. We need to know, what you want this project to look like. You know it. We don't know it. So just little things, can help. I don't know. There are lots of jokes. Please just make sure that those are localized in, culturalization, really, so that people can appreciate. I always have this example regarding, would you like a cup of tea? When you step in an English house, the first thing that people say to you, oh, would you like a cup of tea? And, British people always answer, oh, I love one. Right? It's something that if you do in an Italian house, they will think you are completely mad. Would you like a cup of tea? Nobody would ask you that. So unless in the game it's clear that you are in, you're stepping into a British house, and then that would be good. Then I will translate, oh, vuoi una tazza di tè? That would be fine. But if you're just stepping in a house that could be anywhere, you cannot say, would you like a cup of, translate, would you like a cup of tea? You would say, oh, vuoi un caffè? Would you like a coffee? Something to drink, a glass of wine, maybe. So that's really important. And we need to know from the developer the freedom that we have. How much can we put of our creativity in the game so they could be more appreciated by the locals.
Okay, great. That all sounds good, but let's talk about the money. So the unit that is used is a word.
Yes.
That's what?
Word.
A word.
Word.
So if I use short words, it's more expensive?
No. Even letter,
But what is a word?
that's the standard for the industry. So the first thing to do to understand, how expensive is your project is to get your words, the words of the entire project, the graphics. It could be a pain if you haven't set up right from the beginning, but you have to do that because that's what makes you understand how much it's going to cost, and if you can afford it at all, if you can afford just one language, 2 languages, whatever. So sit down, trying to put all these details down, and then, talk with your localizator, and then, together you can find the best way, to do it. Maybe, you can start saying, oh, I would love to record this game, and then you realize that you have 50 characters, you will have to use 15 actors, it's going to be huge, blah, 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 blah. And then you say, okay, pointless, don't do it, just do subtitles. And another thing very important to understand the specs of subtitles, graphics, length restrictions. Length restriction, I've seen so many things, you know.
Especially in the interface, when you have the names of the buttons, or you have...
But also subtitles. Subtitles. So because English tend to be much shorter than any other language, it's crucial to understand if, you know, we have the freedom to get, how much freedom we have to be longer, or if we have to be exactly the same. And whatever it is, it's better to know it before, because, and for the audio, it's absolutely, I mean, vital. I've seen so many projects being to be completely re-recorded because some information were missed right from the beginning. So it's a pain, but sit down, get those specs down and say, okay, we've got so many characters for this line, recording is time constraint, which means you have a leeway, maybe 10% shorter, 10% longer, or strict time constraint, cannot be longer, cannot be shorter, or lip syncing, or sound syncing, so there are all sorts of different things, and a good localizator should explain to you all these different things. It should ask you this question. If they don't ask you this question, they're not to be trusted.
Okay, so let's say that the word is 5 characters, including spaces, and the normal rate would be around 10 cents for a
something
word.
Like that, yeah.
A bit up, a bit down, but around that.
Yeah.
So if you're going out with 10 languages, then each word will cost you €1.
Yeah.
So if you basically are sitting and typing, as you type, you can feel the money ticking, you know, hello, boom, €1, hello, boom, €1. So basically what you should do is you should talk to your writers, to your creative team, before you start working on the game even, that we're coming out in 10 languages, that this is the budget for localization that we have, and you should try to stick, you know, within 50,000 words, 100,000 words, 10,000 words.
Maybe that could be done for descriptions. I found it very difficult for like the in-game, you know, to give a limit. You give a writer, a game writer, a word limit. I don't know. I find it very, very difficult. But yeah, for the description, yes. If you like need to go on the App Store, you know, the description, then you can try to, you know, be very effective with few words so that you know that you can at least translate that. And it's a good investment. It's not much money. And also make sure, that's another question to ask your localization, that they don't charge, you don't do minimum charge. Because there are some companies that they, you know, if you send 10 words for translation, they might ask you, you know, €50 every time that you send, you know, 10 words. And it happens a lot that you will need, you know.
So what you mean is that if I go for 20 languages and I only have 10 words, then an agency could say anything up to 100 words will cost you €500, even if it's less than this. So I'll end up paying significantly. So you should be looking for an agency that'll charge you the actual rate for the actual content.
Yeah, it's always best to have build up a relationship with your localizator per word, so that they charge you per word, so that you know that all your updates and everything, because otherwise, you know, you're going to pile up and your budget is going to be, you know, very high at the end.
Something you also mentioned was that you should avoid sending unfinished localization assets. Because you're in beta, you're sending out some content, and then you send an update, and so if you have it translated into 10 languages, then every mistake is reflected 10 times. So people
the snowball.
Like, okay, so your advice was to delay sending the assets until the very last moment when you can actually still be on time and send them.
Yeah, that's another thing. You should, again, have a relationship with your localization and ask them, you know, how long is it going to take to do this translation or dubbing, and trying to sort out your assets as the best as possible, because every little thing that you're going to change afterwards is going to be a change in all the other languages. And if the audio is involved, it's a nightmare, because audio is expensive. Every day in the studio is very expensive. Actors, sound engineers, dubbing director. So take a little bit of time, trying to sort those out and then send them out.
So you mentioned relationship, meaning that the developers should ideally find a localization partner they like. And maybe you're only doing one game every 6 months, but you want to have some human relationship, meet them face to face maybe, and so on. And you earlier mentioned that right now a lot of games, they have updates. So I guess this is the reason that you want to keep releasing the patch notes, and even the patch notes, you have to translate them into 10 languages if this is what you launched with.
Yeah, and then you want your localizer to know your game. So the effort that you put towards setting up all the procedures with the localization, find the best way to communicate, we were mentioning before the questions that you might ask, stuff like that. So when you have set up, if you are happy, if you're not happy, of course, with the localization and with the relationship, you should, definitely try somebody else. But, if that effort, again, is part of the development. So if you are happy, if you have set up something, then it's something that you have to carry on. Of course, there is always room for improvement, but then you can move stronger and stronger to the next project.
So something else we discussed with you is that when you're talking about localization, you're not only talking about the product, but you're also talking about the description of the product.
Yeah.
So if your game is so simple that it only has 3 words. Yeah. Let's say no words. No words. Yeah. All visual. Still, for someone to buy that game, they have to read the description. They have to maybe watch the trailer, and they have to look at the screenshots. And whatever you put in the description will directly influence the sales.
Yeah.
So if I'm going out, I would like to sell my game in Korea.
Yeah.
I'd like to localize into Korean. And suddenly, the quality of localization of the description of my game into Korean translates directly into sales. Because if it's technical, they will look at this and say, what is he talking about? This is a bad quality product.
It's an ad. At the end of the day, it's more like an advert. So it's close to marketing. Localization, as much as it's close to the development, is very much close to marketing. In the past, I've been working on a lot of, there was this fashion at a certain point to use talents, especially in Italy and in France. So we work with famous actors that they were giving, a little bit like what happens with Disney movies and stuff like that. So that was something that we were working very, very close with marketing, because we took advantage, of course. We were spending so much money on the actors that, we made contact where they would come to trade shows, doing interviews, TV programs, and that was, very interesting. So this is when you can really use localization or, dubbing and translation, even a little trailer that you can do if you have I don't know, I love narrators. So I think
everybody loves narrators.
So we made a game, we made Puppeteer for Sony when we did all the dubbing, and that was very demanding, and there is a fantastic narrator there. It's like an old theater actor, and it was a fantastic job. So that's great to create an atmosphere. So if you do have a little adventure or something like that, having a little narrator that is telling the story in the beginning, it's always very fascinating. And you can use that, going back to the marketing thing, you can use that as a teaser, so much. So that's again, looking at localization also, so you can look at both ways. It's part of the development and can also be used or abused as marketing.
So what you're saying is that developers can spend a few thousand, let's say a couple $1,000s on localization and get that back and more if it's done properly, because localizing the description of the game, localizing the trailer, it works to sell more stuff. And if you see when I see, for example, mechanically localized description of the game, I feel this is low quality, and I feel that maybe there are also some bugs.
Yeah.
And I also feel that if I have a problem, I cannot, send a question and get a response.
Yeah.
If it's an Asian game and it's localized in poor English, I'm wondering, you know, okay, it's going to crash. What's going to happen? They're going to tell me something that I can understand. Good. So
that's another thing. Sorry, Sergei. Regarding the English, there are a lot of developers that they are not English and they develop in English. Please make sure that you get your English, you know, sorted by professional proofreaders or translators or whatever, because, you know, this is what you said, you know, if you see the language at the end of the day, it's especially written language is the first, you know, approach that people are going to have towards your game. And if there are mistakes there, then, you know, people, I mean, there are foreigners, maybe they don't understand, you know, there is a mistake, but they're going to be English people, they're going to be American people, and they're not going to take the game seriously. So, you know, try to get it sorted, yeah?
I would like to maybe finish with this, and I think this is a good statement, that if you're selling your game into a different region, I mean, in Italy, in Spain, in America, in France, the audience will look at the localization of your game as the sign of the quality of the game. And if you're selling in France and your French is not good, then that's going to hurt your sales. And if you're selling in the States and your English is, you know, a German English or a Russian English, then that's going to hurt as well.
Yeah.
Yes, it's going to be your reputation that
Yes.
these guys are still kind of struggling.
Also showing respect towards the players, which is probably the most important thing, is your audience. When I started, you know, I started such a long time ago, there were no internet, there was no internet, that's what we're talking about. So, but nowadays, you know, with the communities and everything, is even more important because it's our industry is so mature now. Players expect, and they're right, because we have all the means there to do it. They expect a damn good job, and they complain if they don't. So we should make the effort.
Excellent point. So if you have any questions, we can take them now.
Oh, we have a couple of questions. At least I prepared. Does anyone have questions? No? Okay, I'll start a couple. So, do you maybe can recommend some good localization examples for developers? So they want to choose agency, right? And you can like give example. Okay, please translate this small text, and you give it to different agencies, and you can see what example you can give to developers to choose the right agency.
Before Angela responds, I can say that probably the agency that will ask you the most questions is the one you should go with. Because if you'll give something and they cannot understand from the context, some guys will say, what do you mean in this line? What's happening on the screen in this line? And some agency will just translate. And they will hope that if you put it into beta testing, somebody will report this bug and then they will fix it. But you want the agency that will be concerned to understand every line in your sample that you send out.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, you need feedback. You need feedback from the developer. So the localizer needs feedback from the developer. You cannot guess. So if they don't ask you a question, just be a little suspicious.
Mm-hmm. You can just take just take a piece of content from your game. Doesn't really matter. But what you're trying to understand is not because the thing is, if they localize into Japanese and you don't speak Japanese, you will not be able to understand the difference between A, B, and C because they will all send you a bunch of Japanese characters. But what you will be able to understand is who among them paid the most attention to your project and who made certain that they understand everything. And so I would really look at how they interact with you and how much they're how serious they are about your game.
I understand that developers sometimes get, pissed off with the questions that we ask because they already are busy, they're doing things. But, I always say to them, we care about your game, and if you don't show that you care, then we don't care anymore. You know what I mean? You are the first one. It's like your baby. And you should be pleased that we care. We put an effort to try and do the best that we could do.
Okay, another question. Do developers usually send you screenshots together with like Excel sheets, or do you prefer video of gameplay? Or
it depends on the type of game. So if you have, like, for instance, I mentioned before Puppeteer. Puppeteer was a game that was, because you see the problem with games that anything can happen. So it's not, whenever you translate, anything can happen. So you cannot using common sense to translate because a bird can talk, so it's something that, doesn't really happen in reality. So that's why you need support. For Puppeteer, for instance, because, there was so much going on, they send us all, and that's why it's really important to have a very trustful relationship and sign all your NDA and everything, because we receive material, of course, much before then stuff is released. So we receive all the movies of the in-game. So while the translator were translating, they could watch the video. Yeah. So the best thing is to, if you really want to see the action of the game, then if it's a small game, then you can send, the game itself and people can play it. But if it's too long, then it gets very complicated for the translators that should really concentrate on the translation. And they might spend, time playing is a waste of time. So you can say the movies, or you can send, screenshot. Ideally, if you're talking, especially when we're talking about graphics, it's just to have like an Excel sheet where you have all your options, and then you have a screenshot there. So it's easy. You can understand immediately what it's about. And having, again, the length restriction so that you know how many characters you can use.
Because I think this is the biggest question, is that what is happening in the game? What is on the screen? Is this a menu? Is this a dialogue? Is this a rabbit asking me the question, or am I asking this question, and so on? And screenshot normally helps. And if you just give a playable build, it's not really efficient, because somebody has to find the time, play, remember, and so on.
And for scripts, it's even more complicated, or subtitles, because sometimes we've seen scripts. I've seen scripts coming in all sorts of ways, like, sorted by character. So it was just one character talking, and he's, okay, well, what is the answer? What was the question? I get all the answer, but what was the question? Or then not in chronological order. So, you start translating and you don't understand, what has been really revealed before and what is not being revealed before. You have to think, a translation is like a book that is like all mixed up. You got all these pages that they're all mixed up, and you're trying to put them in order. So if you have to translate a script, please make sure that you have the name of the characters, is in chronological order. At least, I know that there are all sorts of alternatives, but at least, the translator can understand who they're talking to. And if you can make the extra effort, maybe to put the gender of the character, because sometimes it's not that obvious. And again, if you have the time, a screenshot of the character, because then, the translator can understand better, who is talking and, the type of character as well.
I think in one of the versions of Dragon Age, menu was translated as a restaurant menu in one of the languages. And the whole reason is that somebody saw the word, and then they just put the word that they would use in a restaurant. And there was no screenshot. They couldn't understand where it's from. And the other thing is, when you do the dialogue and the dialogue branches, when you localize a movie, what do? You sit in the studio, you run the script, and then you watch this 5 minutes, then you make some changes, you watch them again, And in this, because movie is linear, it goes from A to Z. And you spend a few days localizing this 1 hour movie by rewatching every 5 minutes and changing and watching. With the game, the dialogue goes like this. You can choose this answer, you can choose this answer, you can choose this answer, and it's important for the localize, for the translator, to go back and do the whole thing, and then to go back and do the other thing and the other. Because if you, in the files of the game, typically it's this, and then brim, 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 and you forget, what was the whole thing about?
It helps sometimes with, there is some reference, like, the scenario, and then I have like, scenario 1 point, whatever. So you can understand, and that's really important, because again, you can make a better translation. Otherwise, you have to be very vague, and trying to find a solution that would work in any context.
Even in a simple, if you have a casual game, if you have a very, straightforward game with just a few words and a few dialogues, still you want to make some notes and say, this is the final chapter of the game, the player should feel, happy, we're trying to convey certain emotional message, and then the translator can add up the spice in different language with different specifics.
have one more question. So you didn't mention if you had experience of correcting mistakes after other localization agencies. For example, developers localize the game by himself or ask somebody and then send you and said, could you please just check mistakes and do not like translate from the scratch because it will be more expensive? What you can tell about this?
Yeah, it happens. And so, well, when you translate, you have to sort of change your head. When you translate with, of course, you put your own style in the translation and everything. When you review, you have to adjust your correction to a different style. So the approach is completely different. We do that. We have done also with scripts, because sometimes it's happened, because we have our own dubbing studio, so sometimes it's happened that other companies send us the script already translated and we had to record. It's never, a good thing. But sometimes the translation are better than we, expected. So it's an easy work. And at the end of the day, I'm not that sure how much people are going to save. Because if you have a non-experienced translator, like a friend or whatever, doing the translation, well, okay, of course, they can do it for free, so that's fine. But time-wise, and also the reviewer will never go get the game so well, because the reviewer is just going to be there, making the changes, assuming that the terminology is right, maybe using a glossary that's been created by the translator. That's another thing that we didn't mention. It's always important, especially if your game is going to have sequel. Try to build up a glossary, a translation glossary. So you have like all the different, I'm talking about places and names of people. If you decide to translate those, just ask the localization agency to create a glossary and send you the glossary at the end of the work, so you have that in-house as well. It's very precious, because your players are going to get used to calling a place with that name and everything. And you don't want, we've been working on EverQuest since year 2000. So we have massive glossary with all the places and everything. And it's so important that, you keep that terminology running. So that terminology is yours. So make sure that you have it in-house. So that's surely an option you do in the review, but only if you've got very, very tight budget. I wouldn't really recommend it.
The worst case that I had was that we got sent a script which was translated by another agency, and we were asked to record the audio, and it was time constrained. So and we got handed the script on Friday, and the recording was to start on Monday, and they said it's a great agency, we paid them a lot of money, everything is fine. And what we found out was that they took, let's say the English text had 1,000 characters, the Russian text had 1,000 characters, very exact, 360, 360. But in English script, you had 5 syllables, and in Russian you had 7. And when you put the actor trying to read this text, it'll go double the timeline. And so we spent a horrible Saturday and Sunday rewriting the whole thing, because you had to look at the number of syllables and not at the number of characters.
It's never going to be good.
And then a couple of years after that, I've met the people from that agency, and they quoted this project as one of their best. And they didn't know that we rewrote the whole thing on Saturday and Sunday. So I would say probably it's not it's not a great solution.
To be avoided, but if you don't have the budget, or you think you want to do that, do it.
Does anyone else? Oh, okay, we have more questions.
I want to talk about free translations. I know of several cases when the game was great enough, for example, Papers, Please, that the local team noticed it and translated for free. And in Russian case, it was a professional studio. What Sergei must know it, Lazy Games.
I know Lucas, and the story of the whole localization.
Yeah, I read his blog too.
I think crowdsourcing translation is similar to crowdsourcing your medical needs. You can go to forum and say, my knee is hurting and there's some sound in my left ear, and people will give you suggestions, and maybe you follow them, maybe you get healthy, maybe not. To me, a lot of crowdsourced translation read very mechanically. And what happens on Steam, for example, is that people translate very accurately the English text, which is based on the English structure of the sentence and the English culture, American culture. So if there is an American joke, they're going to translate it completely. Like, he went the whole 9 yards, and then it'll be, he went the whole 9 yards in every language, even in the languages that doesn't have yard, that doesn't have the expression. And when I look at this, I feel like I'm talking to a machine, insert your credit card in the left window. Where is the window? Oh, they mean this. Okay, boom.
Well, I think, community, I would call it community translation. There are, people that are so keen on a game, especially if it's like a strong IP, that they are willing to, and they know the game very well, so they can do a translation. But that's fine, but you have to remember that that's a free translation. So you have somebody there that is doing for free in their own spare time, and they might decide from one day to another that they're not going to do it anymore because they've got other stuff to do, or they want to translate something else. So what do you do then? Then you have, all the stuff translated by somebody that, spent a lot of time, knows the game very well, and now you want to carry on, and then what you have to do, you have to go to the professional. So it's just a choice that you have choices there. So it's down to you what you want to do.
But crowdsourced translation tends to be very conservative because there's nobody who can stand up and make a creative decision.
Yeah.
We will rename the character, we will use a different style, and so on. No. Group thinking tends to just provide a very accurate translation of the original text, in this case English, and it's not always a good idea. If you do a crowdsourced translation from Japanese into English, it's going to be very strange.
Any more questions?
Good.
I think
Thank you.
that's it. Thank you so much.